Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
I had to mention our name so we could go around. I start, my name is Frog.
Snake.
Tom. Justin.
Douglas.
Clint.
John.
Larry.
Me. Scott.
Manuel.
Jack.
Peter.
Mark.
Tom.
Joe.
Robin.
Paul.
Winston.
Paul.
Brad.
Richard.
Chris.
Lou.
I did it on the side there.
Okay, I want to introduce our speaker. This is Clint today. And I don't know what he's going to speak about. I'm very sorry about it. So, and then after, it must be about 50 minutes, we will have a break, move out and socialize for about half an hour. And then there are people afterwards, which will go out for lunch. Just hang around.
Thank you. Good morning. I know that you normally have Jim Wilson speak on the first Sunday of the month. Jim has a retreat to go to today, and so we switched speaking times. So for all of you that are expecting Jim Wilson, I'm sorry you're stuck with me. I imagine you're all familiar with this book, Queer Dharma 2, that just came out a few weeks ago. And it's a successor to Queer Dharma 1, where it's just a collection of essays by gay Buddhists dealing with various aspects of Buddhist Dharma as it relates to the gay experience. It's actually quite a wonderful book. And I don't say that because I have an article in there. And I highly recommend it for people. What we're trying to do here in GBF is have the writers who have contributed articles to this anthology come out from time to time and give a talk based upon their articles. I had Scott Whitney a few weeks ago come and talk about his article on right speech. And now today I will be talking about my own article, Finding Sangha, a Gay Perspective. I remember a few years ago reading an interview with Mother Teresa back when she was still alive. And the interview dealt, among other things, with her efforts to open missions in the United States. And she said this is in response to the poverty that she saw in the United States. And the reporter expressed surprise at this remark, and she said that this was not material poverty she was talking about, but the poverty of loneliness. And I remember reading that and thinking that's quite an indictment on the American culture, and actually kind of agreeing with the point that I think she was trying to make with that. There's a really interesting book out called The Healing Web, and this book talks about the results of studies on the effects of loneliness, both on the body and the psyche. And among its conclusions, it shows through these studies that lonely people are less resistant to diseases, that they die earlier, they suffer more from various pathologies, including tuberculosis, heart disease, schizophrenia, and various other mental illnesses. And that they're, not unsurprisingly, that they're prone to die more from suicides, accidents, and alcoholism. Now, you take those statistics and then you look at the core American mythology that we all grow up with. And I think probably the core myth in America is that of the rugged individualist. Our culture is filled with stories that revolve around that that archetype, whether it's the man, or sometimes, less often, the woman who struggles against impossible odds and finally prevails at the end, gets the love interest, gets the success or material wealth or whatever, the goal, through stint of his own efforts. You have the archetypes of the pioneer that have carved a homestead out of the wilderness, of the cowboy that defeats the villains and then rides off into the sunset alone, or the Horatio Alger, the urchin from the streets who, through his own efforts and abilities and by himself, moves from rags to riches. You have it today. You just go to any Stallone or Schwarzenegger or Bruce Willis movie, and you see the same archetypes in action today. These are all myths of hyper-individualism, and they're all myths that just about every American child is raised upon. And they're presented as the archetype of what the American male should be. Little attention is given to the dark side of these myths, to the isolation that these myths not only embody, but that they ennoble. These heroes rarely credit their success to the support or nurturance of the surrounding community of family and friends. It's only by their own efforts that they achieve these goals. The stories are not about how a community overcomes obstacles and prevails, how a victory is achieved through a shared effort. I believe that myths such as this that we grew up in our culture set a stage for a general sense of isolation that goes on through our culture, through the sense of the rugged individualist. I think most people in our culture, to some degree, are affected by myths of this sort, and to some degree have to deal with the isolation that this creates. I think also that the isolation that is typical in the American mainstream is heightened many times over when you start moving into the fringe subcultures. There, not only do you deal with just the isolation I've talked about, but you also deal with the isolation of the disenfranchised. I have a quote that I want to read from my article where I was quoting somebody else. This is from sociologist Irving Goffman. And this is talking about the one unblushing American male. In an important sense, there's only one completely unblushing male in America. A young, married, white, urban, northern, heterosexual Protestant father of college education, fully employed, of good complexion, weight and height, and with a recent record in sports. So if you meet all that qualifications, then you're doing great. For those few of us who don't have all those qualities under our resume, then we have to deal with the status of how we measure up as far as the ideal man in this culture. The farther we move away from those lists of qualifications, the more second class we are pressured to become to feel. I think as gay men in particular, we have to deal with this list of criteria that's given to us and how we measure up to it. I was talking some time ago to a friend about the odds of gay men in San Francisco finding community and all the things we have to fight against in order to make that happen. First of all, as I already talked about, we belong to a culture that stresses individuality over anything else. We belong to a gender that favors competitiveness over relationship. Most of us are transplanted from other parts of the country, and we've left our family behind in other areas. And of course, we're members of a minority that is marginal at best and despised at worst. Now, for those of us who have not made the migration to the cities, I think those individuals face a different and even more toxic form of isolation. I think all across this country, gay men and lesbians are living in small communities and towns where their survival depends upon remaining in the closet and keeping a code of silence. And I think that you break that code of silence at your own risk. And the most telling examples recently have been such people as Billy Jack Gaither, who that man in Alabama who was murdered, and Matthew Shepard. Of course, he's unfortunately been the poster boy for what happens when you become too out in an isolated place. So I do believe that every minority suffers from its own forms of discrimination, and that as you go from minority to minority, it takes on a different shape and texture. I believe for gay men and lesbians, that loneliness is particularly telling. For example, a black child, even in a virulently racist culture, still most often is raised in a community where the family, the neighbors, the friends, and everybody around them shares that child's minority status. I'm not trying to downplay the problems that African Americans, for instance, have to deal with. They have their own issues. But I don't think the isolation is as severe as it is for gay men and lesbians. A gay child, on the other hand, finds himself or herself alienated from those most needed for survival: family, neighbors, churches and synagogues, scouts, schools, social organizations. Well, I hope I haven't brought everybody down so far by this talk. It gets less grim as I go on. However, as toxic as this pariah status can be, it does offer certain advantages. If we're not allowed to be initiated into the communities around us, neither are we as likely to be straitjacketed by them. We don't have the luxury of absorbing unquestioningly everything presented to us as true. Those of us who realize this, and the tragedy is that not all of us do realize this, we can look around and with open eyes question everything, and we can go out and start creating communities of our own that are tailored to our own truths and needs. We are less likely to accept things at face value. This can be the first step in a spiritual journey that's represented as sangha. And it involves many of the quote-unquote heavy questions. How can we as gay men find meaning and purpose in life? How can we connect in love with others? How can we feel whole and integrated? How can we move from pettiness and shame and negativity to greater intimacy with everything around us? These are questions that are valid for everybody. But as gay men and lesbians, we must ask them in the context of our own experience and our own unique situations. Those of us that are following a Buddhist path still must recast the Dharma in terms pertinent to our lives. Both Buddhism and the gay culture can benefit from this exchange. Right now, the experiment that's American Buddhism is going on where Buddhist Dharma is adapting to the American culture just as it has adapted to all the other cultures it's moved into in the past. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to claim a seat at the spiritual table and to exert our own influence on this great experiment. As one of the three jewels of Sangha, Buddha, and Dharma, Sangha is essential to the individual's quest for integration and spiritual evolution. For those of us who see this and see the necessity of Sangha, then we need to start asking ourselves some key questions. Where is a Sangha that meets our own needs? What qualities does such a Sangha have? What is the difference between a healthy and an unhealthy Sangha? How does a Sangha aid our spiritual development? Does a Sangha affirm our gayness and let us define ourselves in a spirituality that that also embraces with joy our sexuality. There's a book by Jack Kornfield called A Path with Heart, a really wonderful book which I highly recommend. And he has a wonderful description of sangha in it, which I'd like to read. There is an immense joy that arises in the community when together we give of ourselves. To give of our own spirit to serve is a wonderful and fulfilling part of joining a spiritual community. This giving and receiving heart, this honoring of the sacred, creates the spirit of sangha that characterizes those who are gathered together in the name of that which is holy. The community is created not when people come together in the name of religion, but when they come together bringing honesty, respect, and kindness to support an awakening of the sacred. This sense of spiritual community is a wondrous part of what heals and transforms us on our path. So, I would just like to go over, and this is a purely subjective talk, based upon my own experiences, and I don't claim to be an expert on what it takes to make a spiritual sangha, but based upon my own experience and the own various spiritual communities I've had interactions with, I'd like to go over a set of criteria of what I think qualities a sangha should have that we might want to be aware of when we go on our search for a sangha. It's no means an exhaustive list, and might not even be an accurate list. I think the first quality that there's no order of priority in these things too, but the first quality that I've listed is the similarity of vision. This doesn't mean a cookie-cutter mentality among the members of a sangha, but I do believe that radically different visions within a sangha of what a sangha should be can tear the sangha apart. I think I've experienced this in other communities. I've experienced it in this community as well. There's a quote that Lama Surya Das says in Awakening the Buddha Within: taking refuge in the sangha represents our commitment to living harmoniously with others and working to bring all sentient beings further along on the path to enlightenment. Conversely, there's a need for challenge within a sangha. A sangha can be too much in agreement, and it can be too comfortable with being comfortable. I do believe that the members need to periodically challenge each other to reassess the direction the sangha is taking and to ask if the sangha's current actions reflect its vision, or is the sangha's vision still pertinent to what the members are seeking. Sangha must avoid clinging to empty rituals and rites and to be aware of cult-like behavior. So basically I've just talked about two extremes, excessive divisiveness and excessive uniformity, and the need to strike a middle path between the two. Another characteristic is honesty. There can't be a hidden agenda. It can't be a situation of espousing one set of beliefs but operating on another. There must be room to listen to and to weigh criticism without responding in an attack mode. I want to read another quote from Kornfield. To tell the truth in a community is to make the community itself conscious. In these situations, it becomes a great practice to name the demons and to speak out loud with both compassion and clarity. We must be willing to ask our community, how are we lost, attached, and addicted, and how are we benefiting, awakening, and opening? Speaking openly and honestly with the well-being of the community in our heart is extraordinarily beneficial. Naming the demons with honesty and kindness has the power to dispel illusion. Participation. Every spiritual community requires some amount of involvement of a certain number of people behind the scenes to make it happen. Even just being here today, all of us, require the efforts of a handful of people to set things up and to make the space available for this to happen. Are these tasks evenly distributed to the members of the community, or does it just seem like a handful of people seems to be doing the same task over and over again? I think the saying, you get what you give, is more pertinent than ever in a spiritual community. I had some time I was involved with the Green Gulch community, which is a Zen Buddhist farm up north in Marin. And I used to go there every Sunday, where I would go ahead and do the meditation and listen to the Dharma talk, and then afterwards there would be this tea and muffin little social period where I would just grab a muffin, drink a cup of tea, and talk with some people in a reasonably unconscious fashion. I got involved later on in being in the muffin crew for that community, which was a real eye-opening experience in its own small way. It involved getting people together, a list of volunteers. It involved getting up at 5 in the morning every Sunday and driving to the place and getting there at 6 to make 16 dozen muffins. Involved going through cookbooks and finding recipes, talking to the tenzo, making sure the ingredients we needed were there, putting those suckers together, finding that the ovens sometimes weren't working properly or not at all, finding that the ingredients we expected to be there weren't there and having to improvise, burning the muffins, sometimes having them come out great in a way that we totally didn't expect. And it was an interesting little Dharma lesson, because every now and then I still go back to Green Gulch, and when I do, and when I eat that muffin afterwards, even though I haven't been involved now in making it, it's a real. I have a real sense of consciousness about what went into this little pastry that's in my hand. All the efforts and all the combined contribution of all these different people to make this happen, so that I could have this muffin after meditation. And I wouldn't have gotten that without involvement in the community behind the scenes to be aware of what that was about. Another quality is, I think, balance between the inner work found in meditation and the study of the Dharma, and the outer work in engaged Buddhism. I think both sides are necessary. I think activity without the inner work can be misguided and misdirected. And I think that the inner work by itself sometimes can take on aspects of being self-absorbed. And again, I think GBF is a very good example of that balance. We have meditation as an important part of our Sunday gatherings. We have meditation retreats from time to time. We used to have Thursday evening meditation, which I miss and hope sometime will come back again. And we also balance that with the Hamilton Family Center project. The Hamilton Family Center is a center for homeless families where once a month we have a group of us get together and prepare a meal for the family. About 50 to 55 people, half of whom are children. And there's a wonderful sense of cooperation and spirit when that happens. We put the menus together. We go through, and the same thing as talking about the muffins. You get all these crises that come out. The gravy's too thin. The pie crust is too soupy. Whatever. And it's this sense, and it isn't just a bunch of gay guys getting together and putting this meal on for the sinner. I think the fact that we're a Buddhist community doing this, there is a sense of spirit and action taking place, and it's not grim or pious. It's playful and it's joyful and sometimes it's bitchy, but it's just a sense of people coming together in sangha, doing an action of engaged Buddhism. And I just like to think that's a good example of the balance that I'm talking about. Another quality. How am I doing time-wise?
How are you doing, fella?
Okay. I'm wrapping it up, guys. Another quality that I think is essential is compassion. I think all of us in this room, even the most well-adjusted and confident of us, carry around with those wounds of growing up gay men in a homophobic culture. And I think, unfortunately, that this legacy is often perpetuated within the gay community itself in the form of internalized homophobia, where we're often required to meet standards of youth or beauty or material possessions, where if we don't meet those standards, we are judged and found wanting. And unfortunately, where some of the work of the bullies and bigots out there is perpetuated by ourselves, among ourselves. Our challenge is to undo this legacy that we've inherited. And frankly, that boils down to what we need to do is approach each other in love and compassion. I have another quote here from Surya Das. A sangha should be a haven for us, a place where we can draw strength from the love and support of others as we deal with the challenges that life directs our ways. However, by this, I don't mean idiot compassion as the term used by Chongyam Trungpa Rinpoche. If sangha members are acting out destructively, they need to be confronted on this and guided back to responsibility in their actions, whether this is through a misuse of right speech or sexuality or behaving dishonestly, or any number of other different ways that can tear a sangha apart. And I think it's important when we go looking for a sangha that with compassion as a criteria, that we see if the sangha not only talks the talk but walks the walk. I think there are many spiritual communities out there that do talk the talk about compassion and acceptance that don't live up to that. And Jack Kornfield gives a number of criteria, questions to ask concerning that I think is very pertinent. In the spiritual community, are you asked to violate your own sense of ethical conduct or integrity? Is there a dual standard for the community versus the guru and a few others around him? Are there secrets, rumors of difficulty? Do key members misuse sexuality, money, or power? Is the practice humorless? Does the community have a heaviness and an anti-life feeling about it? Is there something powerful going on that may not really be loving? Is there more focus on the institution and membership than on practices that lead to liberation? Is there a sense of intolerance? When you look at the oldest and most senior students, are they happy and mature? Look to see if the community is based on sectarianism or separation or has a fundamentalist quality to it. The vehemence with which students proclaim the one true way is usually a sign of the unacknowledged insecurity there is of the great unconscious or hidden fear or doubt that underlies it. And as a gay man, I would add a few more questions to that list. Is the sangha gay-friendly? Has the guru or teacher come out with statements supportive of homosexuality? Are there gay members within the sangha? If so, are they treated as equals with the other members? Can sangha members inquire openly and without shame about how to apply the Dharma skillfully to their sexuality? Does the teacher provide answers that are well thought out and relative to the individual's needs and circumstances, or are they just rote responses? And the final quality that I listed in this article that I'd like to talk about is shared experiences. I've been in a number of sanghas filled with good people who were essentially clueless as to what it was like to be a gay man. I was in these sanghas under the assumption that the basic humanity within us all would transcend differences of sexual orientation. And to a certain degree, I still do believe that, but with less conviction than I had before. After a while, I started wearing thin, being the token gay in the groups, where you got involved in such discussions where you would be sharing spirituality and sexuality, and people would be talking about their wives and their husbands and their children, and I started talking about my own experiences of sexuality as a gay man and bringing my spirituality into it and seeing these awkward silences and these pained expressions. The people were always polite to me, but more times than I care to remember, no more than polite. Frankly, for me, there's a real joy in being in a sangha filled with gay men. There's a real sense of coming home. It's very important for me to be able to talk about issues that are relevant to me and very important to me, including my sexuality and my spirituality and the struggle to bring the two, and to have them met with people who can understand what I'm talking about, who can share their own experiences, and can even bring humor into the situation. So I personally think that there is something very important about having a sangha, join a sangha where there is a certain amount of shared experiences and shared background. Of course, there's also a risk to that, as there is to everything, and the risk here is the risk of insularity. Now, all of us here in this room carry with us our own histories and our own stories, and we all have these unique stories about us. This is essentially a sangha of white middle-class men, and I acknowledge that GBF is open to any gay male to come into this sangha and join us. And I believe that the fact that we are predominantly white middle class deals more with the phenomenon of Buddhism in America itself, which is basically a white middle class phenomenon so far, than it is just to us and our own efforts. But I do think that it's something for us to reflect upon, and maybe even to think about ways we can open up to other groups of men. Also, we are a male organization, and I think that that's important in many ways, to have the fellowship that comes with a group of men. But I also think we should be aware of what we give up when we do that, of giving up the voices of women in our group and what that could contribute, and ways where we can hear those voices even while we still remain an all-male community. I'd like to close with a brief quote from my own personal teacher, Ken Wilber. It says, "We are all members of the community of spirit. All sentient beings contain Buddha nature, contain depth, consciousness, intrinsic value, spirit, and thus we are all members of the council of all beings, the mystical church, the ultimate we." So we find ourselves in this individualistic, homophobic culture, pouring out all these forces to keep us alienated and isolated. I think it's so important within our own efforts to nourish either this sangha or any other sangha we choose to participate in, to stress the fact that we are a community of beings, and to stress that feeling of we. So that's basically it as far as my take on what sangha consists of. I'd be very interested in hearing people's responses to that, maybe disagreeing or elaborating, or even adding other points too that I've missed. So I'll leave the floor open to general discussion now.
Yes.
This is a sort of extension, and I believe a difficult point. I believe the community requires relinquishing things as well as accepting them. And by the way, I sort of rushed into that. I wanted to say that I thought your talk was really wonderful, and certainly something that we need to hear, not only as gay men or San Franciscans or queer people or anything else, but just because it's a human problem, and I do think also that it's probably greater in the United States than it is in many places. Not all, but in many. But I think that what I wanted to add is that I think the painful part of community is relinquishment. And I'll explain what I mean by that. It's not obvious. I think there's two kinds of relinquishment. One is that if you want to be in community with everybody, you'll be in community with nobody. Because we only have limited amounts of our time, energy, carrying, well, maybe not carrying, but our time and energy as far as I can see it. And it reminded me of my experience of living here in San Francisco, that at this point I probably have as many close friends and less close friends and so forth as I did when I lived for many years before this in Philadelphia. But what those haven't quite formed for me is a group in which there's a series of interconnections. And I also find in my own desire for connection and interconnection that I'm torn between making more contacts and maintaining many, many contacts and spending my limited energy and time on a relatively few contacts. So it's sort of depth versus breadth. I think it also comes up, and I'm sure this is even more controversial, I think it comes up in romantic relationships, in the issue of monogamy. Because it seems to me, and up until the relationship that I'm in currently, I had been in several relationships, living together long term, etc., and they've never been in the least monogamous, mostly by my inclination. And I eventually came to the conclusion that if I wanted intimacy, which I guess is a two-person sort of community, that I had to give that up. And it's been a painful loss. I don't like that. But, there are those trade-offs. The other area of giving up, the earlier part of your talk about individuality, and I believe that to become part of a community, one has to give up some of one's free choice. Because there will be times when the group, the community wants to do things that isn't exactly what I want to do, or doesn't want to do things that I do want to do. And the same for presumably all the other members. And if we each go off our own ways to make our own specific choices, then we're not going to have community. And of course that came up here, relatively recently, which I think you referred to, that had to be dealt with in one way or another. It's come up in a support group that I'm in and have been in for 5 years, in which there's a question of what authority does the group have, if any, to make decisions, or is it entirely everybody decides, do I want to participate in this or that? So that's what I wanted to toss out.
Yeah. Was that a question or a statement?
It's a statement, but I'd certainly be interested to hear other responses from you or from others around these issues.
I'll speak for a moment. Thank you, Lee, and thank you very much, Clint. I thought that was just a beautiful talk and very deep. And I really liked the way that you started with the wounds that we feel, both as as gay men growing up in this culture, but also as men in general. I think that I forget who's quoted. Goffman's quote talks about stigma and the idea that the only person who's really living an ideal is this sitcom, 32-year-old handsome athletic father. And if you're not that, then it's very painful because almost none of us live up to it. So I think that was a good way to start. And I also have, it's also been painful to see, as a gay community, we recreate. I remember I lived in New York one summer when I was a student, and I went out to a beach community that was full of gay people, and I was really looking forward to being around gay guys and having lots of friends, and it was just like high school. It was like, who are the popular people and who aren't, and who's on the A list and who isn't, and who's got big pecs and who doesn't, and it was like, oh God, I thought I left this 10 years ago, and it was the same sort of bullying, so I thought that was a wonderful point. I don't know what else to say beyond that. I think that this is also a reaction to, I think, what I heard from Lee, and I think it was in your talk, but I think one of the things to give up to be in community that we have to renounce is this idea of the noble individual. And I think I didn't really see that until I started really meditating and began to feel how small and ridiculous my ego was and how frequently it was wrong. And it was kind of humiliating to see how stupid I could be at times. And but then the compensation was that I felt, well, as absurd as this little ego is, there's a way that I'm part of something really, really wonderful. And I think so in giving up sort of the pettiness and the anger and the scorekeeping and judging of my ego, you gain not only the community and strength of the sangha, but connection, as Ken Wilber says, with universal sangha. So, thank you to everyone in the sangha, and thank you for your talk. It makes me feel connected, which is nice.
I do want to stress that with any duality, the solution to an excess in one way isn't to go to the excess in the other direction. That there can be, I believe, an excessive community too, where your sense of boundaries have just totally dissolved, I don't think in this culture that there's as great a risk of that occurring. My point is more to strike a balance between the individual needs and the community needs. And I think that the imbalance right now in this culture is towards the individual needs at the expense of the community needs. But the individual needs are important too, and they must be honored as well.
Thanks for your talk, Clint. Thank you. It was really, you brought up a lot of really great topics for discussion. I think we could probably discuss it forever. One of the things that struck me is that Buddhism, one of the things that's attracted to me is that it's about the elimination of causes of suffering. And we happen to, in this particular group, we happen to share, I guess, one of the causes of suffering in the world, or share, I guess. I think it's also important to remember that we all have suffering. You know, every single, even a white Protestant father who's got the recent sports record has suffering too. And what are we doing as a group and as a sangha and as individuals to eliminate causes of suffering? And I think that also just having had this experience growing up with suffering and alienation around being gay, I think has helped me to not appreciate, but have compassion towards all kinds of suffering. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, I can relate to all types of suffering just from this suffering that I grew up with. And anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your talk, and I just wanted to address the piece that I was really happy you brought up, which was a piece about people of color and racism, or the American Buddhist movement, or the gay Buddhist movement being primarily white. I think that is something that should be brought up and at least dialogued in some way, because I just went to Spirit Rock, just did a retreat on people of color retreat. Oh. There were several people of color who led it. And Jack Kornfield has also sort of come out as a person of color, Jewish, Turkish, which is interesting. And there were a couple of gay people there who talked about how they feel that the community here, not necessarily the gay community, this Buddhist community, but San Francisco gay community, they find is somewhat racist. I mean, they were very blatant about it. So, I mean, I don't know what I feel and what I experience. I'm not really sitting with that yet. But I appreciated your reflecting on that.
Thank you.
I'd like to bring up one thing that sometimes that occurred to me, how we can transform a lack of community into community. And I was thinking of just a fun story that many, many years ago, a friend and I agreed that the most lonely place we had ever been in our life was a cruisy gay bar. And so he and I decided to start challenging it. And so what we did was every Saturday night we went out to some gay bar with a pack of cards. We sat at a table and we started playing gin rummy. And we started having a wonderful time telling jokes. And like as not, we would begin attracting people. Not because we were cute, not because this, not because we were young, not because we had money, not because we were this, not because we were that, but because we were playing cards. And because we were having a wonderful time. And we kept doing this for a while, and I discovered, though, that it was amazing, though, how the shell of loneliness, how really thin it can be in some situations, because it took just the tap of a pack of cards
to shatter it. And we would very often end up with a very large table of people all having a wonderful time, and even sometimes running out buying more cards. So it's like to share that as a possible experience, how our perceptions are often very, very misleading as to what's really happening.
I want to bring something up now. You talk very much about individuality, and I always kind of say I'm from Denmark, and with that I always like to include that Denmark is very liberal and very open and so on. But I still catch myself being extremely limited. Now I am not very fearful about being gay, not even in my working place, and I am an instructor at the academy. But there's one of my colleagues, and she is a little bulldozer dyke, and she doesn't even try to hide it and so on. And the other day we were sitting chatting along, and there were some students there too, but she was talking, and then she said, she had a daughter with her ex-girlfriend, and they just broke up and so on, and now she said, I'm starting dating other girls. But she never said, I'm a lesbian. She just said, I'm dating other girls. And I remember I was sitting with an ex-student of mine, and we were talking, and I said, I have a date. And then I said, by the way, I date guys. I still kind of had to excuse myself to say, I'm gay, I'm dating guys. But this colleague, she didn't even say that. She just said, I'm going to date a girl now, And I like that concept that she didn't even have to come up with an excuse. And I saw that the fear in me is still not to be able to just say, this is it. So it was a good lesson for me. It's just a minor thing in an everyday life I run into. And we just stay there. I said, that's something I had to learn, just to be me as much as I can. So I just want to share that.
I would just comment on that in the basis of the talk. It's just to be you as much, or for me to be as much as I can, but realizing that what I define as me is largely defined by my relationships with the people around me. Or at least that's an important part of my self-definition. So again, it's not just stressing the individual, but it's also stressing the fact that I'm a son, I'm a friend, I'm a worker at a certain place, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a writer. But none of these identities can happen unless other people are around to help define it. I can't be a son unless I have a parent. I can't be a friend unless I have a friend who's also my friend, and so on. So it's just important that I believe that our self-definitions include the relationships that we have in our lives, and we realize that it isn't just this impermeable barrier between me and us. That it's a very open and freely flowing boundary.
Yeah, I want to continue just one thing.
I'm sorry.
No. Because I actually was finished, but I just brought something up. Because yesterday I went to a very nice dinner party, and the topic that came up, there was one girl. She was the only girl in the group, and she mentioned I am the only girl. So we had to kind of specify that. And then she said, we talk about masculine and feminine, and she said one thing a woman should experience was to have a relationship and feel turned down by another woman. So she didn't have that glorification that women are so good and men are so evil and all that stuff. And that we all cause suffering to each other. But what we brought up very much, definitely was a topic yesterday, was the masculine and feminine energy. And I know when I teach, because I teach art, and I say, that's one thing I don't like to see is if I can see the work is made by a woman. I just don't like that. And the same thing goes for male. I don't like to see that the work is made by a man. It's so square and so masculine, the work. And I emphasize very strongly that feminine masculine energy has to be brought up in all forms and shapes. And it's just kind of my way to try to bring that whole concept in of the masculine and feminine energy in each individual, male, female. Yes.
Just a brief societal comment. I think the need for this is even greater now because probably many of you will remember that 10, 15 years ago, there were discussions about lack of community in the United States and how people didn't stay in the same place anymore and churches weren't working, blah, blah, blah. And so what was happening was that people were becoming more attached to their workplaces. And it was their work organizations that were being pressured and responding to fulfill some of that. But as we all know, in the last 10 years or so, or 5 years, that's fallen apart. So as people no longer have careers or stay at places, perhaps particularly in this area, and so again, it means that somehow we have to find something, Buddhist sanghas or whatever, that will fulfill that need.
All right, we're close to time anyway, so I want to thank you everybody for being here, and I just want to know if there's any announcement.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.